Sidney Powell's lawsuits are being rejected, while Giuliani gets the coronavirus. Are election fraud allegations falling apart? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. I hope you're watching today's episode. Seriously, I hope you can see this episode right now. Because right before we recorded this episode on Wednesday, we saw this post from YouTube about supporting the 2020 election. It talks about how YouTube will start removing any piece of content uploaded today or anytime after that misleads people by alleging that widespread fraud or errors change the outcome of the 2020 US presidential election. Although YouTube also claims that, as always, news coverage and commentary on these issues can remain on our site if there's sufficient education, documentary, scientific, or artistic context. Sure. So to be clear, I am not alleging that widespread fraud or errors change the outcome of the election. I am reporting on what's happening with voter fraud allegations as news coverage. And I consider my bad jokes to be artistic. But we have lots of previous experience with YouTube demonetizing, age-restricting, and even removing our videos that were news coverage of controversial events, like the Hong Kong protests and the coronavirus. YouTube did eventually put that video back up, but they never explained why they took it down in the first place. So you can see why I'm worried that YouTube could take this video down. We're working on ways that you can see our content even if YouTube does take it down. More on that in a future episode. So, let's move on to the news we're covering, the voter fraud lawsuits. Perhaps the biggest news is that Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, has tested positive for the CCP virus. That's what I call the coronavirus, since it spread because of the Chinese Communist Party's attempts to cover it up. As with most things these days, we first heard the news about Giuliani on Donald Trump's Twitter. It's hard to know how that will affect Giuliani's election lawsuits. Trump says Rudy's doing well. But the timing of this CCP virus outbreak was particularly bad.
The two chambers of the Arizona State Legislature will suspend their work this week after Rudy Giuliani tested positive for the coronavirus less than a week after spending hours testifying in front of Republican legislators.
Wow. So all those legislators need to be tested for the coronavirus now too. I'd say that makes what the Michigan legislators had to endure seem like a walk in the park.
The answer, point of order. The answer that I gave you is they didn't bother to interview a single witness. Just like you, they don't want to know the truth.
Now that's breaking news. Jokes aside, while the media tends to dismiss Giuliani's claims as just hot air, if you've actually watched the testimonies, you'll see that witnesses, under penalty of perjury, have made some very disturbing claims about voter fraud. Top U.S. intelligence official Daniel Ratcliffe said these issues need to be resolved before a winner can be declared.
You know, I think one of the things that we did well this election was addressing problems from foreign interference, influence campaigns from other countries that we saw in 2016. But people need to understand that's different than election fraud issues, the things that you're talking about, Maria, things like, you know, postal drivers saying they took 200,000 plus ballots from New York to Pennsylvania. Tens of thousands of ballots supposedly mailed in, but no folds or creases in them. More votes than ballots issued in places. People pulling out suitcases and video evidence of that with questionable explanations for that. Those are issues of election fraud that need to be investigated, and there's a lot of them. And it's not just one person or one group of people. It's across the country. And there are a lot of people in this country that don't think that the votes were counted fairly, that the processes at the state and local level weren't administered fairly, and they deserve that accounting.
Obviously, not everyone agrees there was any problem. Christopher Krebs, the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, says he was fired by Trump for saying the election wasn't rigged. Of course, if you already believe that there was massive voter fraud, You might also believe that there would be a lot of well-placed individuals who would be incentivized to make sure no investigation happens. So, for this election to get wrapped up, we'll probably have to wait for the Trump campaign's lawsuits to be heard at the U.S. Supreme Court. But until then, here's an update on the lawsuits happening in the key swing states. Let's start in Wisconsin. Things aren't going great for Sidney Powell. One of the plaintiffs listed in the lawsuit said he was included without permission. And Chief U.S. District Judge Pamela Pepper, an appointee of President Barack Obama, was also not happy about the suit. She criticized procedural and formatting errors in the lawsuits. The state Supreme Court also rejected a Trump campaign lawsuit on procedural grounds, saying it needed to go through a lower court. One judge wrote the investigation was a task we are neither well-positioned nor institutionally designed to do. The statutory process assigns this responsibility to the circuit court. However, in a dissenting opinion, another judge on the court said, by denying this petition and requiring both the factual questions and legal questions be resolved first by a circuit court, 4 justices of this court are ignoring that there are significant time constraints that may preclude our deciding significant legal issues that cry out for resolution by the Wisconsin Supreme Court. But it looks like the Wisconsin court is essentially rejecting Sidney Powell's lawsuit, and that may be the end of it. But in other states, things are a lot more up in the air, which I'll get to after this break. Welcome back. Let's look at Michigan. Here we have yet another defeat for a lawsuit from Sidney Powell, also by a judge appointed by President Obama. Powell's lawsuit alleged massive election fraud. The judge wrote basically that the lawsuit doesn't follow the normal way to challenge elections and asked the court to do things that it can't. Also, she said Powell submitted the case too late because the Michigan results had already been certified, and it represents well the phrase, "This ship has sailed." Another judge, though, allowed a forensic audit of 22 Dominion machines in Antrim County. Dominion vote counting machines in this county had issues. Trump beat Clinton here back in 2016, but the Dominion machines this year showed Biden was way in the lead. Even this New York Times reporter said it made no sense. Turned out to be an error. Now, the Trump team gets to take a look at the Dominion machines in this county. But not for the reason you might think.
The judge's order stems from one voter's challenge. He alleges ballots were damaged during a recount for a marijuana proposal. The order doesn't mention the presidential race.
Will the Trump team uncover something else? Well, if they do, we have a pothead to thank. Obviously, considering all the accusations leveled at voting machine companies like Dominion and ES&S, it's important to have investigators be able to look at the machines. But Michigan Republican senators have accused Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson of trying to delete that data despite a bipartisan call to audit it. In this memo, Benson wrote, "Electronic poll book software and associated files must be deleted from all devices by the 7th calendar day following the final canvass and certification of the election." Now, the Detroit Free Press calls that a routine election request. However, that's not supposed to happen if a post-election audit is planned but has not yet been completed. Michigan's Republican Party chairman, Laura Cox, said Secretary Benson's move to request the deletion of election data amidst bipartisan calls for an audit is just another example of her putting partisan politics over what's best for Michigan. With election irregularities rampant across the state, it is vital that we have this audit before any election data is deleted. Secretary Benson's move to delete this data before an audit raises a serious question. What are the Democrats hiding? I certainly hope they're not hiding pot. Meanwhile, protesters gathered outside the home of Michigan's elections chief.
Stop the steal!
Stop the steal!
Unfortunately for the news media, it was, peaceful. One of the officers said, there wasn't much to it. And I wouldn't even call it a demonstration. It was just a small event and nothing came of it. Nothing came of it? Let's see if he still feels that way after Kanye West is elected. Now to Pennsylvania. U.S. Representative Mike Kelly, a Republican, wanted the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to throw out all mail-in ballots. That's based on a claim the court usurped the legislature's power by altering mail-in ballot rules. But Mike Kelly's lawsuit was dismissed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court on procedural grounds. Attorneys for Pennsylvania election officials said if Kelly's motion went through, it would sow chaos and confusion across the nation. As if chaos and confusion have not already been sown across the nation. After the Pennsylvania Supreme Court dismissed the suit, Kelly applied for injunctive relief from the U.S. Supreme Court to stop the certification of Pennsylvania's votes. The Supreme Court denied that request with no further explanation. Pennsylvania GOP lawmakers are also calling on the U.S. Congress to dispute the state's electoral college vote. In a letter, they say the Constitution empowers Congress to reject electoral votes that are not regularly given or lawfully certified. And they say Pennsylvania's executive branch has undermined the lawful certification of Pennsylvania's delegation to the Electoral College. What could that mean? Well, during the joint session, one House representative and one senator can object to a state's electoral college votes before a debate ensues. Ultimately, all 50 states' respective House delegations would vote on the president, effectively nullifying the electoral college vote, while the Senate chooses the vice president. Wait, does that mean it's technically possible for the House to elect Joe Biden as president, but then the Senate to elect Donald Trump as vice president? I know that's insane, but name one thing in 2020 that hasn't been insane. And now, on to Georgia, where things are really getting crazy, right after this commercial break. Welcome back. Georgia, where some of the wilder allegations of voter fraud have come out. During a hearing, Trump's legal team presented this surveillance footage that they allege shows ballot counting workers telling poll observers late at night on Election Day to leave before continuing to count and pulling out what appears to be boxes filled with ballots. Well, fact check, those aren't suitcases. The supposed suitcases were actually standard containers used to secure ballots. See how silly you're being? So why did these ballot counting workers pull them out after telling poll observers to leave? Well, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation, according to Georgia's top election official, who in no way has any skin in the game, such as losing his job if there really was fraud on his watch. He said workers had first packed the suitcases with valid uncounted ballots and then later unpacked those same ballots. Wait, fact check, they were suitcases. But yeah, factcheck.org says those valid uncounted ballots were opened and prepared for counting earlier in the night in full view of observers. Investigators with the Georgia Secretary of State's office did review all of the surveillance footage and said, in a sworn affidavit, around 10 p.m., with a room full of people, including official monitors and the media, video shows ballots that had already been opened but not counted, placed in the boxes, sealed up, stored under the table. This was done because employees thought that they were done for the night and were closing up and ready to leave. When the counting continued into later in the night, those boxes were opened so the ballots inside could then be counted. Now personally, I always take grainy surveillance footage with a grain of salt. But there are still ongoing investigations into this footage, so we'll see. In response to the video, Georgia's governor called for a signature audit of election results. But Georgia's Secretary of State may have bungled an audit of Dominion voting machines. The audit found no sign of foul play. But he had hired the company Pro V&V to do the audit. And Pro V&V has what you might call a conflict of interest. See, during a pre-election lawsuit that questioned the reliability of Dominion, it was Pro V&V that certified it was safe, even though, according to court documents, they did only superficial and cursory testing. Pro V&V had also approved a last-minute system-wide software change just weeks before the election. So I'm pretty sure Pro-V&V has a strong interest in concluding that everything with the voting machines is A-OK. Also in Georgia, Sidney Powell's lawsuit was thrown out in court. She alleged Dominion voting machines flipped votes for Trump to Biden. What did District Court Judge Timothy Batten have to say about that? He said Powell does not have standing to bring these claims and waited too long to bring the lawsuit, which should have been brought in state court instead of federal court. Which is to say, it was thrown out on procedural grounds, not on the content of her suit. Powell is appealing the dismissal, and her team says they'll proceed as fast as possible to the Supreme Court. Trump himself made an appearance in Georgia this past Saturday. He reminded his supporters to vote in the upcoming Senate runoff race, because if you don't vote, the socialists and the communists win. And by socialists and communists, he was referring to the Democrats, just in case there was any confusion. By the way, at the start of the month, Georgia courts ordered that Dominion machines couldn't be wiped before forensic inspection. But now, some Georgia election officials are saying that ban needs to be lifted because they really need to wipe the machines for the upcoming Senate race. According to their court filing, the restraining order preventing counties in Georgia from wiping or resetting the voting machines has grave and serious consequences. I bet. On to Nevada. In Nevada, another Trump campaign lawsuit was dismissed by a court. Trump's lawyers made a series of allegations of voting irregularities, including almost 8,000 ballots cast by voters with addresses that are physically non-existent. Approximately 15,000 voters registered to vacant or commercial properties that cast ballots. About 2,500 votes by voters that legally changed their address to another state or county. Approximately 42,000 voters who voted twice in Nevada. Approximately 1,500 voters listed as deceased by the Social Security Administration. Almost 20,000 Nevada voters with a non-Nevada mailing address. And approximately 6,000 USPS flags on vacant addresses. But the Nevada judge said the Trump campaign did not prove under any standard of proof that any illegal votes were cast and counted, or legal votes were not counted at all, for any other improper or illegal reason, nor in an amount equal to or greater than 33,596, or otherwise in an amount sufficient to raise reasonable doubt as to the outcome of the election. The Trump campaign says it will appeal to the Nevada Supreme Court. Also in Nevada, here's one out of left field. The Department of Justice was alerted to a link between the Nevada election email system and a Pakistani company with known military and intelligence ties. True the Vote, an anti-voter fraud group, requested voter registration rolls from the Nevada state government. They were sent a downloadable voter file via email. In this letter to the Assistant Attorney General for National Security, the group says CC'd in it was the email of the CEO of Cavitec Solutions, the Pakistani company. The fact that this company was CC'd on an email containing access to the Nevada voter registration database appears to be evidence of a breach within the Nevada Secretary of State's email system. And if all that's not weird enough, there's even more after this final commercial break. Welcome back. Let's head now to Arizona. According to a Forbes exclusive, the FBI is investigating voter data theft. Arizona federal agents raided a home looking for evidence of a cyber attack on an unnamed organization and stolen voter data. They left with 8 hard drives, 3 computers, and a bag of USB sticks. The warrant revealed investigators had been looking into a computer intrusion that occurred from October 21st to November 4th, which overlapped with Election Day. They were looking for any evidence within the seized computers that showed they'd been used to access the IT network at the office, as well as protected voters' information and any indication that it had been disseminated to other people. This happened in Maricopa County, which was also the home to the whole Sharpiegate controversy. Maricopa County keeps popping up in stories about election fraud in Arizona. I'm sure that's not what they want to be famous for. They probably want to be known for their dwarf car museum. No offense to little people. Leaders in the Arizona government are also calling for an independent audit of the Dominion software and equipment used by Maricopa County in the 2020 general election. Oh yep, popped up again. Last week I mentioned that the Maricopa County GOP chairwoman, Linda Brickman, in a sworn testimony, said she saw Dominion machines switch votes from Trump to Biden. She said, "I observed with my Democratic partner the preparation of a new ballot, since the original one was soiled or wouldn't go through the tabulators. I read her a Trump Republican ballot, and as soon as she entered it into the system, the ballot defaulted on the screen to a Biden Democratic ballot." 28 Arizona GOP lawmakers are now calling for the legislature to decertify the election results. House Majority Leader Warren Peterson writes, "The election should not have been certified with the number of irregularities and allegations of fraud. Especially troubling to me are the allegations surrounding the vendor Dominion. It is imperative that a forensic audit occur immediately of the equipment and software. Upon any showing of fraud, the legislature should immediately convene to decertify the vote." But Arizona Republican House Speaker Rusty Bowers is pushing back against his fellows, saying the state legislature cannot and will not overturn the results. So like I said last week, the allegations of voter fraud continue. As more information comes up, things certainly seem to be getting fishier. But no smoking gun has come out yet. And though some Trump campaign lawsuits have been thrown out, it's not because there is no evidence of voter fraud, it's because there were specific, often procedural issues with some of the lawsuits. But there's a big story on the horizon, which I'll probably have to talk about next week. Texas has filed a case in the U.S. Supreme Court to sue 4 battleground states. Yes, states can sue other states in some circumstances, and that goes directly to the U.S. Supreme Court. Texas is suing the states of Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin over changes they made to election procedures amid the coronavirus pandemic. They call them unlawful. Texas is asking the Supreme Court to block the Electoral College votes in the 4 states, a total of 62 votes. Texas also is asking the Supreme Court to delay the December 14th deadline for Electoral College votes to be cast. Oh goody! That means this election can drag out even longer than it already has. I move that we extend the year 2020 by another 6 months, so we can have time to watch the world burn. Let me know what you think about the lawsuits. Be sure to subscribe, and as always, a big shout out to everyone who makes this show possible by supporting our work on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Visit patreon.com/AmericaUncovered to learn more. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.